What most people do is they go in, solo this kick drum track and start working on that and say, let me make this kick drum sound great. Mistake. What you want to do is, in this video, in our continuation on our music production series, we're going to focus on mixing your music, specifically on balancing and EQing your tracks. And I'm going to reveal all of the behind-the-scenes tips and tricks that the professional engineers use to make their music sound great. So let's jump right into it. Now, in the last video, we took a random vocal that we downloaded from the internet and we built an entire song around it. We made all of the music tracks and all of that. So let you check out the changes in the song that I made since the last video. Check this out.
Finally the war is over, it took some time. Now I'll be fine. I've got what's mine, and I'm gonna keep it. You can never take it from me. I'll never let you lay another finger on me. On me. You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it. But I'll be gone before you know it, and I'll be as far away as I can. But I'll be gone before you know it.
Now, the first step in mixing is to get a volume balance for the tracks. Let me show you what I mean. So let's pull up our mix bus here. And what you see here are the volume faders for the tracks. So we have our kick drum, the bass, snare, hi-hat, trap snare, and all of that, right? And what we'll do is move all of these down to 0 here. And we'll start by just playing the track and then moving the faders up until we get a relative balance where we want the tracks to be, right? Now, this is super important. You want to get this way because if you start EQing and all of that first, you'll have a sort of skewed version of what your tracks are, because like say your kick drum and your bass guitar are like this much off in volume. It's going to sound like one needs to be EQ'd less or more than the other one. So this is why you want to get your balance first. So all we're going to do here is play the track, start turning up the faders, and see what we have. Let's start with the kick drum. Okay, here we go. Turn the snare up. Pretty good. Bring the hi-hat in. Pretty good. Bring the trap snare in. All right, then from there, we'll go back and get the bass in. And what's happening with the bass is it starts later in the track, like right here. So let's start the track right there, and then we'll open back our mix bus, and then we'll bring the bass in. That's pretty good. Let's bring the shaker in. Good. And then this trap kick comes in at the end of the phrase. I think that was pretty good. We'll play it over, but let's get the other instruments in there as we're going. Let's go from there. Let's get the piano in. Let's get the first pad in. Second pad. Go back and then we'll get the guitar in there. get the synth going. Lead instrument. That's pretty good. Now we'll get the cymbal crescendo in there. It comes in going into that chorus part. So should come in right here. That's pretty good. And that's where we are. So now let's get the lead vocal in. Now, usually I don't do this in any sort of order except doing like the drums and bass first, because that's kind of the bottom of the foundation. So I want to get that in first. And then I just build everything else on top of that. But the other thing I like to do in this process is do the lead vocals last. If I have some background vocals, I put those in like the piano and the pad around the same time as those. But the actual lead vocal, I like to do that last because everything else is the foundation. And I just want to sit that lead vocal on top of everything. So I want to hear the foundation first and then bring that lead vocal in. So let's do that.
You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it.
All right, good enough. Now, that's what we're doing in the balancing process. Now, one of the things that a lot of people talk about in this process is something called gain staging. And gain staging gets a lot of talk kind of unnecessarily these days, in my opinion, because in the digital realm here, when you're working in a DAW like Cubase, Logic Pro, Studio One, Fruity Loops, whatever you're working in, gain staging is not really an issue. That's something that's held over from the old analog days when people were mixing on consoles. And it's still true for consoles. You kind of need a gain for those or gain stage for those. But here you don't need to do that. The one thing that you need to do is just make sure nothing is peaking. And what I mean there is here on my master bus, you'll see this. Now, if I turn any of these tracks up too loud, let me just do this, and you'll see this turn red down here.
Take it from me, I never let you lay another finger on me.
See, when you have that, let me bring these back. When you have that, when you have some of your tracks turning red, this is just the master fader where everything is coming, but you could have that on individual tracks as well. You could have some clipping going on in your track, and that's going to cause some distortion. So that's something you don't want. And that's why it's also important to make sure you record your tracks at proper levels too. So when you have this, say this fader here at 0, and you got this sound coming in there, nothing is peaking. You're not getting any red or anything like that. So that's balancing. And again, this is a very important first step. So now from here, let's move on to EQ. So I'm going to pull up one of my favorite EQs here, and it's one of the more popular EQs that a lot of producers use, and it's the Pro Q3 by FabFilter. This is a really good EQ. It's, kind of industry standard now. So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks about EQ that's going to blow your mind. And it's going to be so simple, you're going to know why you hadn't thought about this yet. So a lot of people think that in order to be able to EQ, you have to have like this perfect ear to be able to identify certain frequencies and all of that. And nothing can be further from the truth. Why? Because you already know them. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Let me demonstrate this. Let me close this right quick. Open up my piano here. Now, if I ask you to identify whether or not this pitch I'm going to play is high or low, let me know. Is this a high or a low pitch? You already know it's a high note or high pitch, right? Same thing. If I do this, is that a low or high pitch? It's a low pitch, right? You already know that intuitively. So now we've demonstrated that you know the difference between high and low. And it's the same thing if I played a note like this or this, and I asked you were those notes like really high or low, you would tell me that, it's maybe a little high, seems like kind of in the middle or something like that. So now you know mids, and that is the main frequencies of the frequency spectrum: lows, mids, and highs, and you just identify them. You've been trying to identify these pitches your entire life, so you know them. But as long as you're able to identify the lows, mids, and highs like we just did, you're good to go. Let me show you how this works when it comes to EQing your sound. So I'm going to open up my mix bus here, and I'm going to go back to this EQ. Now, here's a trick. What most people do is they go in, solo this kick drum track, and start working on that. Say, let me make this kick drum sound great. Mistake. What you want to do is you want to start EQing in reference and relevance to other tracks. So one of the things that we engineers know about EQing is that there are certain sounds and instruments that automatically we just know are going to mask each other. So like the kick drum and the bass guitar, notorious for masking and occupying the same frequencies. So what we're doing with EQ is we're going to take that masking, like this kick drum here, bass here, and they're sitting on top of each other, clouding up the same space. We're going to do some EQ to kind of separate them so they're still occupying mostly the same space, but they have like a carved out little section of their own. Now, the way that you do that, this is the trick. You don't want to listen to this kick drum in solo. You want to listen to it with the bass guitar. And when you're EQing the kick drum, let me show you. I'm going to add just some EQ here. And maybe a little bit of narrower of a Q. And when you're EQing the kick drum, this is the trick. You're going to listen to the bass. You're not going to listen to the kick drum. Because what you're doing is you're carving out the kick drum to provide space for the guitar, for the bass guitar. So we're going to turn this up and down and go up and down the frequency spectrum until we start hearing the bass clear out a little more. All right, so now let's take this frequency again. Let's put one right here. There we go. And we'll just start moving this up and down until we see where it's mostly masking the bass guitar. So let's move it up. Let's see. It's mostly masking there. So listen now that I've boosted that frequency. Listen to the bass. What is on that? Boom, boom, boom. Listen to what happens to that note when the kick drum hits. You'll hear it kind of fade away. It'll be like boom, 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 boom when the kick drum hits. Watch. Right? So when you hear that, and that takes a little bit of time to get used to hearing if you haven't done that yet. So I understand that. But you kind of definitely know that those two things are masking each other. So what we'll do is just turn this frequency down and listen to what it's doing to the guitar now. You hear it, right? The note is going there. So again, you're listening for the note when the kick drum plays. Listen again. Now listen when I turn that frequency back up on the kick drum. Listen. See how you can hear that note fade out a little bit? This is EQ, my friend. This is what you're doing with all of your sounds and instruments on EQ. Now, let's do this with the kick drum and the bass so we can carve out the frequency spectrum for each other. So let's turn this frequency down. Now, what you want to shoot for here in amounts is start with like -3 dB or plus dB, whichever one you're doing. There's all of this stuff between like whether or not you're supposed to cut or boost or whatever. Do whatever makes the sound good, whichever one gets you there first. I like to cut a little bit first so you're kind of carving out a little space. But again, I could have, instead of this, I could have done the opposite and went and boost this frequency on the bass so it could have been heard. So I just like to start with cutting. But as far as amounts, you want to start with like a good 3, maybe 3 or 4 dB, either up or down, plus or minus, and start there. And if that works, leave it on. You don't have to go for these like super amounts, like trying to bring this down like, 25, 30 dB or something like that. If you're having that kind of trouble where you need to do that much to a sound, it's probably something that's wrong with it in the recording process and you need to go back and do it. There are times where you kind of have to do stuff like this, but generally speaking, you want to stick with this. And again, this is not a hard and fast rule. Sometimes it may go up to plus or minus 10 or, something like that. But you want to start with the least amount possible. All right, so let's get this bass and kick drum going. So that sounds good. Now, what I'm going to do is, this is the trick, another one. I'm going to go over here and put this same EQ on the bass guitar, and I'm going to boost it instead of cutting it. So now I'm going to turn that up like 2 or 3 dB, right? Now listen to what that does. Again, listen for when the kick drum and the bass guitar plays together. I'm going to start with these off. I'm going to A and B them so you can hear it. So let me turn them off first. Turn them off, and then I'll go on. So listen for when that kick hits and the bass are playing. So listen. Now listen, see if you have more clarity with this. Just that simple. You've EQ'd this out, and you've got, this is what professionals do. They're not going in and trying to reinvent the wheel and, carving out these major amounts. Some people are, but usually the professional engineers are doing these small moves. So again, we got a good start. Let's let it stay there for now. Usually in the kick drum, we can add a little bit of high end to bring out that attack a little bit more. So maybe up around 3.5, 4K or something like that. So let's bring that up as we're playing. And you'll listen to that, the high part of the kick drum. So that part of the kick. All right, here we go. So you hear that part of that snap part of the kick. That's what you're bringing up a little bit. Not much. Just bring a little bit out. Now, again, let's A and B that. Let's listen to how it sounds. This is without. This is with. All right, so from there, what we got is a little bit more punch out of that bass because we boosted a little bit, and we got the kick drum out of the way of it. So it's that simple. Let's leave it right there for now. Again, we may come back later and do some more adjustments to the kick and bass, but that's where we want to leave it. Same thing with all of the other instruments. Everything else is pretty much the same process. So one of the things we can go to from there, usually the snare. There's not much you have to do that. If you have an acoustic snare, like a real snare drum, generally speaking from there, you got to pull out a little bit of the mids, boost a little bit of the highs, and boost a little bit of the lows. So you'll have what's called like the smiley face. I'll bring that over to show you what I'm talking about. Let me delete these. So usually on a snare, if you have acoustic snare, and it's the same with like these drum machine snares as well. So you'll have something on the low end, maybe around 140 to 200 or so. You'll boost a little bit of that. As you see, this snare drum doesn't have any sort of low end in it at all. So you really don't even need any. So, and then you generally pull out some mids around 600, 700 or something like that. And then you'll boost a little bit of the highs to get a little bit more of that snap. So you have what's called a smiley face right here. See that? From here to here is a smiley face. All right, so here we go. This is without. This is with. Just gave us a little bit more clarity in that snare. Done. Leave it alone from there. Same thing with the hi-hat. You're not doing much to it. I'm dragging this EQ over. We'll delete these bands again. Oh, sorry. Let's delete that. Delete here. Same thing with the hi-hat. You just want to kind of get a lot of this stuff out of the way. So give a little bit of boost around there. That's all you need to do. Bam, you're done. And then, so when we get that done, let's get to the other instruments. Now, you remember I said about the bass and the kick sort of clouding each other? That's something that we know notoriously happens. It's the same thing with like keyboards, pianos, organs, and synths and pad instruments, and even guitars. A lot of those instruments occupy that same frequency up in the sort of upper mids and the highs, right? So let's go there. Let's go to our piano. And we'll listen to the pad. So the pad is kind of playing in the lower end and then the piano is up here. So you have some separation already, but it's probably where they meet around there in the center where you want to start focusing on. So let's bring an EQ over there and get it on our piano. We'll delete that. Again, I'm deleting these because I'm dragging this EQ from the other frequency or the other instruments we use. So let's listen to our piano. Now, again, we're EQing the piano, but we're going to listen to the pad, right? Let's listen for the pad. Let's put an EQ maybe around 100 or so, and then we'll start EQing. You hear that? That's exactly where I heard that frequency start to cross over and they start to cloud each other down there in that low mid region. So what frequency are we at? Around 142? Yeah, kind of lows to low mids. All right. So watch when I pull this up as listen for the pad. So the pad starts to disappear, right? That's how you know you have some frequencies that are clouding each other. So all we're going to do is take this frequency on the piano and start to pull it down a little bit. And then from there, we'll pull up some highs in the piano, maybe pull a little of this mid out. Usually pianos have this mid frequency around that boxiness area where you want to pull out a little bit. So let's pull that out. And then we'll boost a little bit of the high end, maybe around 3K, 2.5. Too much. Okay, now listen. Again, what you're listening for here is listen for the pad. I'm going to turn this off, and we're going to A and B it and watch what happens to the pad when I bring this in. See if the pad gets clearer. Start with it off. On. Pad got clear. This is the trick, guys. So again, a lot of people going EQ and trying to EQ that instrument and make that instrument sound good. But if you do it this way, if you are EQing the instrument to kind of EQ it out of the way of the other instrument, you're going to have a lot more separation and a lot cleaner mix. This is the way you want to approach EQ. So I'm going to go through these tracks and do the rest of them. It's the same with all of the other instruments here. And I'll go through this process really quickly off camera so you can see the result of it. So let me do that really quickly. All right, so I've gone through all of these and made these same EQ moves between all of these instruments and the vocals. Let me A and B it and turn it on and off as it's playing so you can really hear it. I'll start with it off. Check it out.
You thought you had me wrapped up like a gift in a box to collect whenever you wanted it. But I'll be gone before you know it. And I'll be as far away as I can. But I'll be gone before you know it.
That's the EQ process. That's all you're doing. And I'll show you what I've done here on all of these instruments. They're minor moves. Everything I did with the kick and bass and the pianos and all of them are minor moves. Check this out. Really minor moves here. -1, +1 in a 1.3, 1.4. Any instrument you want to choose here, go to the trap snare. Plus, what is that? Not even a whole dB, 9.97. Same thing here. 1. Very, very subtle moves. And when you do these subtle moves, they're going to accumulate across tracks. Now, what I will say here is that this is not, again, necessarily something you have to keep. Just as I said in the last video with music production, you may wake up tomorrow, you may go put this in the car, you may listen to it, you may say, oh, that's a little too bright, that's a little too dark, or this instrument needs that, and you go back to it. And you can do that. Just make sure you approach it with this same sort of approach, that you're not going in with this big, heavy hammer trying to hammer everything and carve out everything with this big knife and all of that. Stick to the subtle moves. If you hear something you don't like in your mix, go back to it. Maybe add a dB or 2 or 3 dB, subtract 2 or 3 dB, whatever. Do those subtle things until you get it down. Now, in the next video, we're going to focus on compression because using a compressor is the next biggest thing in mixing. You have EQ, compression, and reverb. Those are like the trinity of mixing. So we're going to focus on compression in the next video. So stay tuned and thank you for watching, and make sure you subscribe to the channel.